They didn't say his name. Didn't offer a handshake. Didn't ask if he was the father of the bride. They just pointed, "Guests sit in the back, sir." And he walked. Past the velvet chairs with brass name tags, past the smiles that didn't reach him. How many times can a man serve with honor, and still be treated like he doesn't belong? And when it's your own blood that forgets you, what part of you is left standing? Frank DeWitt didn't wear his uniform that day. Not because it didn't fit, but because he'd been told this was her day. Danielle wanted simple, clean, modern. No salutes. No reminders of the past. So he came quiet, pressed shirt, scuffed dress shoes, tie too tight but respectful. Always respectful. They didn't reserve him a seat. Didn't mention him in the program. Didn't include him in the rehearsal dinner toast. But he came anyway. Not to be seen. Just to bear witness. As he moved past rows of strangers in tailored suits, some glanced up and looked away just as quickly. They didn't know this was the man who used to stand in sandstorms for her freedom. Didn't know he still wakes up at 3:17 a.m., hearing gunfire that isn't there. What they saw was an old black man with a limp and a cheap boutonniere. He sat down in the last row, next to the catering cart. Pulled a photo from his coat pocket. Clarice, in uniform, smiling in the sun, and placed it gently on his lap. There was no seat for her either. And just like that, the wedding began. Without him. Without her. But not without consequence. Frank sat still as the music began, his shoulders slightly hunched forward, not from the years in his spine, but from something heavier. The kind of weight that doesn't show up on a scale. A hand brushed his jacket as a woman squeezed past him, murmuring a polite sorry without making eye contact. He nodded once, though she was already gone. 2 rows ahead, people turned to greet each other, laughing in small clusters. Some took photos. A baby squealed, and someone hushed it quickly. The sun filtered through the white tent, catching in the lace of the altar decorations. Frank shifted his foot slowly to ease a dull ache in his knee. His hand remained resting on the corner of the photo, the one of Clarice in uniform. He didn't look at it now, just kept his fingers there, as if remembering took less energy that way. Someone nearby whispered, "I think he's with catering." A quiet chuckle followed. Frank didn't move. Didn't turn. Just breathed in through his nose, slow, the way he'd learned back in Georgia when the heat pressed in and there was nothing else to do but stay calm. The officiant welcomed everyone, voice bright and rehearsed. Today, we gather to celebrate the union of Danielle Marie DeWitt and Bryce Anthony Langston. Frank blinked once. Danny's full name echoed through the space like it belonged to someone he barely knew. She stood at the front, veil lifted, hand looped into Bryce's arm. She smiled easily, lips parted like she'd never known tension. That same smile she'd worn in school pictures, the ones Clarice always kept in the kitchen drawer. Frank had once memorized the pattern of her freckles. Now, he watched from a folding chair that rocked slightly when he shifted. The man next to him leaned sideways to get a photo. Frank moved a fraction to make room. No one thanked him. No one spoke to him at all. A gust of wind fluttered the hem of Danny's dress. She reached down briefly to adjust it, fingers quick, then returned to stillness. Frank wondered if she'd even seen him arrive. If she'd looked back. Or if this, too, was part of the plan. His tie felt tighter now. He loosened it just enough to breathe without drawing attention. From a distance, he looked like any other guest, an older man in a borrowed suit, sitting alone, watching a ceremony he hadn't been invited to shape. The officiant continued. Words about love and new chapters, about families joining, about support and presence. Frank's hands were still. Not clenched. Not folded. Just resting, open, on his thighs. Like he wasn't holding anything anymore. Behind him, a child kicked a folding chair, the metal legs rattling briefly. Frank didn't flinch. In front of him, someone reached up to record the vows with a phone, blocking half his view. He didn't shift. Didn't ask. When Danny turned to look out at the crowd, just for a second, her eyes swept the front rows and then past them. They didn't land on him. Or if they did, she gave no sign. Frank sat back. The chair creaked softly. A small movement. But enough. Enough to feel like the difference between presence and permission. Between being included and merely allowed. After the ceremony, guests were ushered into the reception hall, a high-ceilinged room strung with lights that flickered soft and gold. The staff moved quickly, clearing glasses, adjusting place cards, lighting the candles that lined each long table. A jazz trio played near the entrance, low and polished, the kind of music that stayed just under conversation. Franklin DeWitt stood by the far wall, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair that wasn't his. He hadn't been assigned a seat. No card. No table number. No one noticed. He waited, not because he didn't know what to do, but because he still hoped someone might call his name. Someone might say, "Mr. DeWitt," this way. But no one did. So after a while, he stepped back, took a slow breath, and walked to the edge of the room, settling near the hallway where servers came and went, carrying trays. From there, he could see the head table. Danielle was already seated between Bryce and his parents. She was laughing at something Bryce's mother had said, leaning in, her hand gently brushing the side of his jacket. The train of her gown had been clipped up now, revealing silver shoes beneath the hem. Frank adjusted his watch. The band was old leather, worn smooth near the buckle. He glanced at the time, though he had nowhere to be. He just didn't want to be caught standing still too long. A man approached, well-dressed, mid-40s, with polished shoes and a glass of white wine in hand. "You with the staff?" he asked, friendly but brisk. "Or family?" Frank looked at him. "Family," he said, voice even. "Oh," the man nodded. "Bryce's side?" Frank didn't correct him. He just looked down for a moment, then gave a quiet, almost imperceptible shake of the head. The man waited a second longer, then excused himself and moved toward the bar. Later, during the toasts, Danielle took the microphone with practiced ease. "To the Langston family," she said, "for welcoming me as one of their own." Glasses clinked. Smiles all around. "To my mother," she added, voice softening, "who would have loved this day. I feel her here with me." Frank stood a few feet behind the last row of tables. He didn't blink. Didn't move. "And to my Uncle Robert," she said, "who stepped in for so much these past few years." A small round of applause followed. Someone behind Frank whispered, "That's sweet." He stayed just as he was, hand resting loosely in front of him. Not clenched. Not raised. Just placed. The fingers curved inward slightly, like they were holding something invisible. No one mentioned his name. Not during the welcome. Not in the program. Not when the DJ read out the bridal party. Not once. It wasn't that they didn't know who he was. It was that they chose not to see him. And he let them. Because there's a kind of quiet a man learns after years in uniform. A stillness that doesn't break just because something inside him already has. The hallway near the coat room was quiet. A few guests drifted in and out between courses, looking for a moment away from the noise. Franklin DeWitt stood beside a tall ficus plant, half hidden in the corner. One hand rested against the wood paneling. His other hand held a glass of water he hadn't touched. He wasn't meant to be there. He hadn't been asked to join the group photos after the toasts. No one came to find him when the photographer called for immediate family. So he had wandered soft shoes on carpet, one step at a time, until he ended up here. The lights in this part of the venue were dimmer, cooler. Not meant for celebration. Just enough to find your coat and move along. Down the hall, near a set of half-open doors, he heard voices. Familiar ones. It's just, he makes people uncomfortable, Danielle was saying. Her voice carried in that particular way when someone thinks they're being quiet, but isn't. He doesn't know how to talk to people anymore. Everything's military, or sad, or just off. Someone replied, male, soft laugh, low register. Bryce. Well, I mean, he seems nice enough, he said. Just kind of. I don't know. Out of place? He looked lost during the ceremony. Danielle exhaled hard. He was supposed to sit near the back. I even told staff ahead of time. And now he's just lingering. I don't want him hovering around when we do the first dance. There was a pause. You didn't even mention he was a vet, Bryce said. I didn't think it mattered, she answered. He didn't do anything important. He trained people. He wasn't in combat, or anything. Another silence. Longer this time. The kind that held more than one kind of truth. Frank's fingers slowly closed around the rim of the glass. Not tight. Just enough for the plastic to creak. Then he placed it on the small side table beside him. Neatly. Centered. And walked. Past the ficus. Past the hallway mirror that reflected nothing he wanted to see. Past the line of chairs by the wall, where two older guests were checking their phones. No one called after him. He moved through the lobby, then out the main doors, holding them open an extra second for a couple entering from the parking lot. The man nodded. Frank nodded back. Outside, the air had cooled. The evening sun hung low, painting the tops of the parked cars in quiet amber. Frank stood for a moment on the sidewalk, adjusting his coat by the lapel. A thread had come loose. He pressed it flat with his thumb. Then he stepped off the curb and kept walking. Not rushed. Not slow. Just steady. At the far end of the lot, a line of trees rustled in the breeze. The music from the reception was still faintly audible, muffled by walls and distance. He didn't turn back. There was nothing left to turn toward. And in his coat pocket, beneath the folded napkin he never used, the photo of Clarice remained. Still warm from his hand. Still facing upward. Still waiting. The back lot was mostly empty now. A few cars idled near the curb, engines low and steady. Franklin DeWitt walked past them without glancing in. The gravel shifted under his steps. His shoulders were slightly drawn forward, not from the cold, just from the weight of everything that had gone unsaid. He stopped near the edge of the lot where the asphalt met a stretch of thin grass and silence. The kind that fills up behind you when no one follows. Behind him, The reception lights glowed through wide windows, music rising in rhythm, distant and untouchable. Frank reached into his coat pocket, not for his keys, but for the edge of the folded photo. Clarice, still smiling, still steady. He looked down at it for the first time all evening. Not long. Just enough. Footsteps approached, quick, uneven, not rehearsed. A voice followed. "Excuse me, sir?" Frank turned. Slowly. The young man approaching wasn't dressed like a guest. His jacket didn't quite fit. Collar too stiff. Hair freshly trimmed. He wasn't holding a drink or a phone. Just his own hands, knotted in front of him. Frank waited. Not impatient. Just quiet. "You're Sergeant DeWitt, right?" The question came out thin, like the speaker wasn't sure he had the right to ask it. Frank didn't answer immediately. He studied the young man's face, dark-skinned, early 20s, nerves visible even in the way he stood. The name tag on his lapel said Malik. "I was stationed at Benning," the young man said. "Basic, 2018. You weren't there then. But they still talk about you." Still, Frank said nothing. But the stillness shifted. Malik stepped closer, voice low now. "The obstacle course revisions. The night fire drills. The cold evac protocols, they said all of that came from you. My squad ran DeWitt sequence every damn week. Half of us cursed your name. Other half, we finished deployment alive." Frank's hand dropped slowly from his coat pocket. Not surprised. Just listening. "I'm Private Thompson," the young man added. "Malik. We studied footage of your training tapes. I never thought I'd meet you in real life." For a second, Malik looked unsure what to do next. Then he straightened. Shoulders squared. He raised his right hand, not for a handshake, but for a sharp, respectful salute. Held it there, steady. Like someone taught him what it meant. Frank didn't return the gesture. Not right away. He let it sit in the space between them. Long enough for it to mean something. Then he nodded. Just once. Malik dropped the salute slowly, like he knew better than to rush through a moment like that. "Sir," he said softly. "They don't know who you are in there. But I do. I just wanted to say thank you." Frank looked back toward the building. Then up at the sky, darker now, stars barely coming through. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Even. Most people don't remember the ones who hold the line. But that doesn't mean the line wasn't held." Malik said nothing else. He stood a few feet away, hands by his sides. Waiting. Not for a lesson. Just for the chance to be near the man behind the name. Frank stepped forward. Not much. Just enough to close the distance. They didn't shake hands. They didn't pose for a photo. They just stood there, 2 generations, under a parking lot light that flickered once and held steady. And for the first time that day, someone looked at Franklin DeWitt and saw exactly who he was. Frank returned just before the sun dipped below the tree line. The reception lights were brighter now, pushing shadows into the corners. Laughter spilled out through the open doors, warm, unaware. Music had shifted to something faster, something meant to keep people from noticing the time. He walked in alone. Not escorted. Not introduced. The uniform fit. Pressed that morning. Sleeves sharp at the edge. The rows of ribbons caught the chandelier light as he moved through the crowd, slow, straight-backed, deliberate. He didn't scan for faces. He wasn't looking for anyone to approve. He stopped at the edge of the dance floor, just behind the last table. The noise dipped for a second, maybe two. Just enough for a few heads to turn. Just enough for a silence to open wide and uncertain. He didn't speak. Danielle was near the center of the room, arms linked with Bryce. She caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. Looked once. Then again. The smile on her face didn't fade exactly. But it paused. Frank didn't move closer. He stood, heels aligned. One hand resting at his side, the other holding a folded paper, creased and worn, edges softened by time. On it was Clarice's handwriting, still steady. A letter never mailed. A letter meant to be read today. He didn't unfold it. He stepped forward just once, placed the note on the corner of the gift table. Then straightened. Adjusted the brim of his cap. And waited. No one had told him where to stand. No one had invited him to rejoin the party. But something about the way he held himself unbending, still shifted the room. A child stopped mid-step. A server slowed her tray. Danielle looked around. Not at him, but near him. Like she was deciding whether to approach, or wait, or pretend. She did none of those things. Bryce leaned in, whispered something. She didn't respond. Frank didn't interrupt. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't wave or ask for the microphone. He stood there as if standing were enough. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He was present. He was dressed the way no one asked him to be. He was visible in a way no one had prepared for. And when a man is no longer asking to be seen, only choosing not to disappear, there's nothing louder. At the edge of the room, Private Malik Thompson stood still. Just behind the soundboard. Watching. And though Frank never looked his way, the young man straightened anyway. One man in uniform. One in training. Two stories no one had planned to hear tonight. Frank took one step back. Then turned. Not away from the room, but toward the hallway. Toward the final photos. Toward the moment they would say, "Family, please gather up front." He wouldn't ask for a place. But he'd be there. In full view. And this time, if they forgot again, they'd have to do it with their eyes open. The DJ's voice filled the room. At this time, we invite the families of the bride and groom to the front for a special photo. Laughter. Movement. Chairs scraped back. A flurry of pastel dresses and gray suits made their way toward the flowered arch near the stage. Someone adjusted the uplighting. Someone else fixed a boutonniere. Franklin DeWitt stood at the edge of the room, still in uniform, hands behind his back. He hadn't moved from where he placed the letter. His stance quiet, but anchored. A young woman with a clipboard passed him, paused briefly, glanced at the chestful of ribbons across his jacket, then kept walking. No words. Danielle "Danny" DeWitt stepped forward with Bryce. She smiled for the camera, teeth tight, eyes flickering toward the crowd. Her hand tightened slightly around Bryce's elbow. He leaned closer, speaking something meant just for her. She nodded once, too quickly, then turned her attention forward again. Frank didn't take a step. But the moment shifted when someone else did. Private First Class Malik Thompson moved from the corner of the room, past the dessert table, past the vendors and florals and family. He stopped 2 feet in front of Frank, straightened his shoulders, and raised his right hand in full salute. The room didn't go silent all at once. It rippled. First at the front, then slowly back. Heads turned. The DJ hesitated. A glass clinked against tile. Frank's eyes didn't move, but he returned the salute, slow, deliberate, nothing showy. Just a man acknowledging another man who knew where to look. The camera shutter didn't click. Danielle turned fully now. She saw Malik first, then her father. Still, present, in full dress. Whispers floated through the room. Who is he? That's her dad. Why's he in uniform? Wait, that's Sergeant DeWitt? Frank lowered his hand. But he didn't leave. He didn't walk forward. He didn't speak. He just stayed there, in full view. And this time, when the photographer lifted the camera again, Frank wasn't in the background. He wasn't a shadow by the door. He was in the frame. Not because anyone called him. Not because they suddenly remembered. But because Malik Thompson stood in the middle of the room and reminded them, without a word, who he was. A salute. A pause. And a room that could no longer pretend not to see. The applause faded slowly. Not sudden. Not unified. A few claps lingered, hesitant, like people unsure if they were celebrating something or trying to catch up to what had just happened. Franklin DeWitt lowered his hand, then gave a small nod toward Malik Thompson, who stepped back quietly into the edges of the room. No fist bumps. No pats on the back. Just that nod. Enough. The photographer took the family photo. Some smiled wide. Some didn't know how. Frank wasn't told where to stand. But this time, he didn't ask. He walked to the end of the row, angled slightly behind Bryce, and stood still. He didn't put a hand on anyone's shoulder. He didn't lean in. Just stood tall. Present. Danielle "Danny" DeWitt didn't look at him until the camera flashed. Then, just for a second, she turned her head, not fully, but enough for her gaze to find him. Her lips parted, slightly. No words. No gesture. But she looked. And didn't look away. Later, the music returned. The buffet reopened. Conversations resumed in pockets. Aunts asked where the cake was from. Uncles gave long toasts to no one in particular. The machine of the evening kept turning. Frank stepped back from the crowd. Walked toward the edge of the patio where the lights didn't quite reach. His shoes tapped softly on the flagstone. He removed his cap. Held it in one hand. The air was cooler now. Easier to breathe. A woman approached, older, dignified, glasses low on her nose. Geneva Ellis. She didn't speak right away. Just stood beside him, their shoulders angled toward the dark lawn. After a pause, she said, "Clarice would have been proud of how you handled that." Frank didn't answer. But his grip on the cap shifted, fingers pressing gently into the crease. "I should have said something sooner," Geneva added. "But I'm saying it now." He nodded. Not as reply. More like acknowledgement. Inside, the DJ called for the couple's first dance. Danielle and Bryce moved to the center. She glanced toward the patio, toward her father. And this time, she did more than glance. She stepped away from Bryce. Walked toward the open doors. Stopped halfway between the music and the quiet. Frank looked at her. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say I was wrong. But she said, "You coming in?" He held her gaze for a long beat. Then shook his head just once. Slow. "I already have," he said. She didn't understand at first. Not fully. But she heard it. And stayed still. Frank placed his cap back on. Turned toward the parking lot. He didn't leave angry. Didn't walk fast. Just steady, like always. Not everyone apologized. Not everyone clapped. But Franklin DeWitt left that wedding on his own feet. And this time, he didn't walk away unseen. There are moments in life when being seen matters more than being celebrated. Franklin DeWitt didn't return to his daughter's wedding to demand attention or reclaim a title. He returned in uniform not for applause, but for something quieter, dignity. And when the room finally paused, when a young soldier saluted without fanfare, the truth broke through: respect isn't granted by seating charts or speeches. It's earned in silence, held in posture, and witnessed when the noise fades. Even without an apology, Frank walked away not erased, but remembered. Not everyone said his name. But they will not forget his presence. In a world that often overlooks those who've carried the heaviest burdens, his story reminds us, sometimes, just standing up is enough to shift a room. Have you ever had to reclaim your place, not with anger, but with quiet resolve? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to feel seen. Like this video, subscribe to Black Veteran Stories, and join us as we honor the lives that never ask for spotlight, only the truth.